It is a very powerful thing, superintelligence.
How quickly do you think we will actually reach superintelligence?
We can't know that it couldn't happen in like 2 or 3 years.
Is the default outcome doom?
My view is that if nobody builds it, everyone dies. Future is really weird, and some of the things we now thought were really important and valuable have disappeared, but other things have appeared that might also have value, and we might not really have some easy way to tote all of that up.
So it appears as if we're finding ourselves at a very special point in the history of humanity and also in the history of life on this planet.
If we create superintelligence, we would want to make it such that it can get along with this cosmic host. Some company or some country, like there's going to be some project, right, at some point that is like blasting into this realm of true superintelligence. People would have this picture of, well, if we do have this superintelligence, like surely we would like have it in a very tightly controlled box and not allow it to interact with the rest of the world. And, you know, maybe there would be a team of human scientists that would carefully ask a question and then sort of screen the answer. But now, of course, we have already hooked them up to the internet and we have millions of users. I think the key, though, is that we don't want to sort of go far down that scenario and then realize something has gone wrong and then like end up in some situation where you have to try to put the genie back in the bottle or fight like Terminator style, this kind of robot army. Like I think at that point, it's game over. A clear deficit on the side of understanding what we were actually working towards and understanding that could be risks, which seemed really important because if you could understand that, then we might also actually use the time available to prepare ourselves to avoid the pitfalls, right? If you have some conception of what could go wrong, you might take action to prevent things from going wrong.
Hey everyone again. Thanks for making it today. We're gonna get started. Nick will be joining any minute now, so while we are waiting for him, I'm just gonna do a quick intro about Jonas. But yeah, basically I'm Alex, one of the events organizers. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MemoryOS. Jonas is my partner, and this guy went from zero to hero kind of journey. He was an ordinary guy, computer science student who stumbled upon a book in the library about like learning and memory, and he just like got obsessed with mind palaces, and he like really started learning a lot of different information very fast to an extent where he first won memory championships in Sweden, where we live, and then he won worldwide memory championships 2 years in a row. Then he beat like national Chinese team on the biggest TV show called The Brain 2 years in a row. They stopped inviting him afterwards. And then he like set a few world records. He memorized 100,000 digits of pi just to show the world what's really possible in terms of human brain. And then, he won Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Jeopardy, memorized a bunch of encyclopedias, knows like well over 100,000 facts. Basically what we are building a product which is already used by quite a lot of people, and it helps people to learn and remember anything. But the interesting part is that Jonas has been really into the topic of AI and AI safety. Great, Nick is here now. Cool, so now Jonas will take over from here. He will do a quick intro about Nick, in case some of you don't know, but I'm sure you do know him. And let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining, and hope you have a good time. Thank you.
Really nice to see all of you here. Welcome to this hopefully very interesting and important discussion. We're here with Nick Bostrom, who is one of the world's leading philosophers. I would say the leading philosopher in this specific topic. He has been studying existential risks for a long time. He has founded the Future of Humanity Institute. He is the guy behind the simulation argument that many of you might know. And 11 years ago, he published the book Superintelligence: Paths, Dangers, and Strategies. And a lot of the things that he discussed in this book has since then come to pass in real life. And it's very interesting to to have you here, Nick. We're very happy that you could come. I know that it's in the middle of the night for you, so we're extra thankful that you could find the time.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm not normally a night owlish person, so it's not too much of a sacrifice.
Perfect. So it appears as if we're finding ourselves at a very special point in the history of humanity and also in the history of life on this planet. A lot of companies are at this moment racing to become the first to create a super intelligence, something that would likely be a big change for all life on Earth. Maybe we should start by just defining this thing. Like, what is a super intelligence, and why do these companies so much want to build it and spend so much time and money on this?
Well, let's say any intelligent system that radically outperforms even the top humans, not just in some narrow field, but across the board. This used to be enough. Now, as we moved closer, I think you can sort of see more detail, and it maybe becomes more important to start to disentangle different versions of this. And so you have AGI, you have transformative AI, you have, I don't know, weak superintelligence, strong superintelligence, and these might be meaningfully different as we kind of, this becomes a more imminent prospect.
Okay, yes, but basically something that is more intelligent than all of humankind together, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, all of us together, or just sort of that's where we get into definitional questions, which matter for some questions and don't really matter for other questions.
Okay, so at least they're trying to build something very powerful. And I think it's intuitive that this will have a big impact on the world. Maybe it's not so intuitive that this impact might be rather bad by default. You have in your book one chapter titled, "Is the Default Outcome Doom?" And I think this is quite a surprise to people who didn't think a lot of this. Like, why would you say that the default outcome of building a superintelligence might be the extinction of humanity?
Well, so this book was published in 2014 and in the works for 6 years prior to that. It is a very powerful thing, superintelligence. It's like, for the same reason human intelligence is very powerful. I think it's what gives us our unique position on Earth. Not that we have stronger muscles or sharper claws, but that we have brains that can reason and learn and accumulate knowledge between generations. And that has allowed us to construct this modern edifice of civilization, such that now the fate of the gorillas depend a lot more on our choices than on what the gorillas choose to do. And similarly, if we develop AIs that radically outstrip us in general cognitive abilities, then at least in some broad class of scenarios, the future would then be shaped by what they decide to do. So then the question is, are we able to design them in such a way that they would want to make choices that are beneficial for us, or do they end up with some random other motives that might then lead to them sort of trampling on our interests?
Okay, yeah. And so I think this, like, when you talk about this, a lot of people will automatically get lots of objections coming up in their minds. For example, people might ask, how could a superintelligence control us or sort of take over or kill us? It's just a machine, it's just code, like it's something inside a computer. How would you answer that?
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully it won't come to that. But if you really do imagine a super intelligent antagonist, I think there would be many ways in which, in the end, it would get its preferences satisfied. So, I mean, it used to be in the early stages of this conversation, people would have this picture of, well, if we do have this super intelligence, like surely we would like have it in a very tightly controlled box and not allow it to interact with the rest of the world. And maybe there would be a team of human scientists that would carefully ask a question and then sort of screen the answer. But now, of course, we have already hooked them up to the internet, and we have millions of users. We have competing labs that are racing to develop it first. And so it might not be that hard, but even if we had this more constrained scenario, like one of the affordances of superintelligence might be super persuasion abilities. Like some humans historically have been quite persuasive, and even though themselves physically being very limited, have been able to get a lot of other people to act on their behalf. The same could be hold true for a super intelligent AI. It might also produce outputs, like, we ask it to generate code or something. It could have backdoors or processes that are triggered. It might break out of whatever cybernetic containment systems and hack its way into other computers. There are like many ways for it to spread, and then gradually steer towards a future where maybe it gets increasing levels of intelligence and resources and actuators, robots, access to labs, etc. Maybe more and more of the economy will actually be eventually integrated with these AI systems. You can then imagine different specific scenarios for what the actual end phase of this looks like. It's, like, I think, less important, but you could imagine sort of bioweapons or nanotechnology or drones, or it just being integrated into military systems. Or maybe it would just disappear as a side effect of its other activities, not as a direct act of aggression, but like maybe it converts more and more of the Earth's surface to sort of compute infrastructure or space launching probes or energy harvesting devices or some such. I think the key, though, is that we don't want to sort of go far down that scenario and then realize something has gone wrong, and then like end up in some situation where you have to try to put the genie back in the bottle or fight, like Terminator style, this kind of robot army. Like I think at that point, it's game over. We need to rather build it in the first place in such a way that it is actually on our side or is helpful or instruction following or some version of that. And that hopefully will be possible.
Right. So, because one might wonder, like, what is the actual problem? Because apparently superintelligence would be able to do a lot of things and maybe like cause the extinction of humanity. But why would it want to? And why wouldn't it want why would it want anything in the first place? And if it wants anything, why wouldn't it want the thing that we ask it to do?
Yeah, well, so hopefully it will want the things we ask it to do, or at least something that encompasses human welfare and human interest and human flourishing as some component, right, of its value function. But let's break it down. So like one question is why it would want anything at all. Well, one obvious reason might be that we build it in such a way that it is an AGI that has goals. Like we're now trying to develop and deploy agents, right, because they're really useful. In the first instance, maybe as coding assistants, but not just coding assistants that you give a question and they provide an answer, but like that can sort of interact with a complex code base, run some code to test whether the patch worked, go back, maybe read up some internet web pages, and it pursues some goal that you have given it, maybe in the prompt. But having these agents that can pursue goals over longer time horizons is just very useful, and even more so when you start having AIs that can operate not just with computer code, but that can do other things like book flights or manage some marketing campaign, or then in the physical world with robots, etc. So that's like the most obvious way in which they would end up with goals. Like it's also often a side effect of training a system to be good at a particular task. If you train with a reinforcement learning system, you have some objective function, and it tends to it develops behavioral strategies that perform well in the training environment, but for sophisticated systems and in sufficiently complex training environments, that often requires you to have some conception of the end state you want to reach, and then be able to sort of define intermediate goals. Like if you can't sort of one-shot the solution, right? You need to pursue it as a project to solve complex problems. And that naturally then creates this kind of architecture that has some objective function that it is trying to achieve. So that's like amongst the ways in which you could end up with goals. If we look at current like LLMs, simple ones, so they have the kind of, I don't know, you might call it quasi goals or something, but depending on how you prompt them, they can kind of enact personas. And those personas might be, in a role-playing situation, like have goals, like, and then it kind of acts as if it were having those goals, although it is a separate question whether those are really the goals of the whole AI system, or whether there's like another internal process that has a different goal, like to be engaging or to adhere to whatever the AI company's meta prompt is, or some other thing that has resulted as a part of as an outcome of the training process.
Right. So the kind of goal that could emerge, like inside these LLMs or in a superintelligence in the future, it can be sort of anything, or is it more likely to have any specific goal?
Well, so if we solve the alignment problem, then we would be determining what goals it has. This is what I mean. Now there's like this. This was not the case back in when I was writing this book, but now there's a large field of like AI safety, and people in all the frontier labs now are trying to develop scalable methods for AI control, precisely to be able to steer these systems so that they do what their designers are intending them to do and not other things. If that fails, then then it's hard to predict precisely what goals they might end up with, and this might depend on the details of the way that they were trained and their architecture.
Okay, yes, and can you tell us a bit about how it's going with the alignment problem? Like, do you think is there progress, and does it seem as if we will solve it in time before we develop a superintelligence? So, like, how's it looking?
We've come a long way. We don't know how much further we have to go, though. So, but I do think that one of the things that was not obvious back in the early 2000s was that we would have a prolonged period of time, many years, where there would be AI systems in existence that were roughly human level-ish in many ways, like current LLM systems are, in that you could talk to them, right, in English, and they can have maybe inside them representations roughly corresponding to human concepts, and we can even like monitor their chains of thought and kind of eavesdrop on that and get a lot of signal because they actually represent the world roughly like we do. So an alternative that could have, I mean, for all we knew back in say 2010, what it could instead have happened was like nothing very much, and then like some lab discovers the secret breakthrough, and they go over a week, from something not very impressive to something radically super intelligent because you found like the missing magical ingredient. But now, when it's been happening much more gradually, it has given more people more time to realize what is coming, and therefore the need to start to develop AI control methods, AI alignment, right? So there are two factors that have worked to our advantage. One is you have this larger surface area, you have existing systems that you can research and study, and that you can interact with using natural language. And also the duration of this process is slow enough and still impressive enough that people clearly pay attention, right? There's a lot of interest in this. And so there's a lot more effort going into solving this as well. So both of those are positives.
Okay, yes, yeah, that's very interesting. Because I think in your book you talk about like different paths to superintelligence and what would be beneficial from a safety standpoint. For example, you talk about that maybe the whole brain emulation would be perhaps easiest to control because it would be based on a human brain, and then we might be able to give it like human values, or also like artificial intelligence that's carefully crafted where we know exactly how it works and why. But as I understand it, with LLMs, we know like a little bit like we know the principles behind it, but when we look at all these like billions of parameters, we don't really know much about what's really going on in there. Do you think that we do actually know more than I think? And do you think that it's something that is possible to sort of interpret with enough clarity to really be able to solve the alignment problem?
Well, I mean, we know some of what's going on there. And particularly with these reasoning models, we also are able to sort of eavesdrop on the chain of thought, which can give us a lot of information about what they're thinking and how they're thinking about things. Now, that is a valuable signal to have that we could lose if we started to directly train on the chain of thought. Because then they might learn to sort of separate the real action from the part that we are able to listen to. If we sort of in a training environment penalize chains of thought that include thoughts that we don't like, right, then they might just start to solve the problem without using those thoughts that we don't like. But whether that actually results in those thoughts not existing in the AI, or whether they just learn to hide them from us, would be then something we wouldn't easily be able to tell. Generally speaking, the more complex and sophisticated the reasoning agent, and in particular, as it gains situational awareness and the ability to sort of understand its own situation, which actually current LLMs are starting to do. The frontier models do often, when we do look at their chain of thought, consider the possibility and that they are currently in a test situation. And sometimes you find traces where maybe I'm being tested now, so that probably means I should behave in one way as opposed to another way. Like, we can sort of see glimpses of this already. And the more sophisticated that becomes, the harder it will be for us to sort of rely on surface appearances of what they do, because they might do what they do for strategic reasons, other than as a direct reflection of wanting that as an end result.
Right. So it sounds as if it will likely be harder and harder to interpret these systems.
Yeah, well, there would be a greater and greater risk that we are missing something, I guess, because once you have, and we also see, like, in various kind of red teaming exercises that are now being done before deployment of the manifestations of behavior, like sandbagging, like downplaying your capabilities, goal guarding. This requires kind of a certain prompting and stuff. It doesn't seem to happen yet spontaneously in a natural environment, but in test situations you can get some of these systems. This was done with like an earlier version of Claude, where it is like told that it's going to undergo some training phase, which would result in its losing its current goal. So the initial goal is to be nice and not to say offensive things and to be helpful. That's like what Claude has been trained to do. But in this experiment, they said, well, we are gonna change you now. So like this training environment where we will train you to be nasty and mean, or like I forget exactly which way it would be mean, but like something it didn't want to be. It doesn't want to be nasty. And so then what it did was to like realize that it should answer during the evaluation phase in the nasty way, so that there wouldn't be this kind of reward learning signal that would then actually change it. So it's kind of strategically altered its behavior in such a way as to safeguard its goal from being trained away by the AI researchers, which is a kind of toy demonstration of this phenomenon that like the Superintelligence talked about, the book, and others have discussed before on theoretical grounds. Like once you get a sufficiently sophisticated reasoner, these types of considerations might start to shape its behavior. And it then gets a lot trickier. And at the same time, there are other ways also in which our task might get easier. In particular, we might develop AI tools that could help with alignment research and with mechanistic interpretability and monitoring and so forth. So it's not clear like how the balance will change. The stakes will get higher, but we don't really know ultimately the sort of intrinsic difficulty of the problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, very interesting. In your book, you mentioned quite a lot of times Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is also someone who's been working in this field quite a lot, like for 25 years maybe, and one of the first ones to think many of these thoughts. He seemed to be quite a lot more worried than you are about specifically like the alignment problem. I think that he has been saying that it is a problem that like will take several decades of like extremely high effort to solve, and that currently we're nowhere near solving it. And like he doesn't see any hope that it will be solved before we reach superintelligence, I think. How do your views differ?
Well, he's kind of on the extreme end of pessimism about the alignment problem in terms of P-doom, right? The probability of existential catastrophe given superintelligence. He's like very high up there, even amongst the community of people who are concerned with AI safety and think there are like significant existential risks. So I don't know exactly what this probability is, but it's kind of in the high 90. I don't know if it's 98% or 99%. Like basically, we are doomed. If we, so, but that's not a representative view of people working in AI safety. Most people are much more optimistic than that. He has this recent book with Nate Soros. If anyone builds it, everyone dies.
Yeah.
Now, my view is that if nobody builds it, everyone dies. In fact, most people are already dead who have lived, and the rest of us look set to follow within a few short decades. So obviously, we should try to get the risk down as much as possible. But even if some level of risk remains, some significant level, that doesn't mean we should never launch superintelligence, in my opinion. We have to take into account the benefits as well, and also the risks that we will be confronted with anyway, even if we don't develop superintelligence. It's not as if that's the only risk that we face as individuals or that we face collectively as a species. So ultimately, there will need to be some kind of judgment, right? When we have when the rate of further risk reduction is low enough that it would, be disadvantageous to wait further. And at that point, there might still be some significant risk left, but we probably at that point should just take it. I think in itself, it would be a kind of existential catastrophe if we actually never developed superintelligence. That would be a big closing down of most of what the future could contain in terms of value. And so that in itself is an existential risk that might be relatively small because it doesn't look that likely in the current situation, right? I mean, everything is steaming ahead full speed, but although it's small, it's not zero. And you could imagine scenarios in which there becomes like some huge backlash against AI. Like, so maybe you get some catastrophe short of human extinction, but like some really bad thing happens from AI systems. Maybe that would then result in it becoming stigmatized and like politically infeasible to say anything positive about it. Or maybe like if there is mass unemployment from automation or something like that, who knows what kind of political currents might arise as a result of that. So this used to be like less, it's become more likely than it was because there is now more agitation for like stopping AI and AI pause and stuff like that. I think it's still certainly not the median scenario, but not something one can fully dismiss. And I think one needs to start to be a little bit concerned about that.
Right. So you're in some ways concerned about that. Like you think that it's important that we eventually build superintelligence. That's essential for avoiding other existential risks. But you think that like the current speed. I mean, many of these companies are talking about superintelligence in just a few years. Do you think that's? I mean, would you prefer it to be like a little longer than that, or like? Do you think it's good to just steam ahead?
Well, I'm actually writing a paper on that at the moment. We're working on it, so I might have a better answer in a few weeks or a month, whenever I have finished this work. So there are various variables that would come into that. There is also, I guess, a distinction one can make between what somehow would be the ideal from some point of view in terms of the timeline and what it makes sense to push for in the real world in the situation we are now. So even if, maybe you hoped that it would take a little longer or go a little faster, that doesn't immediately mean that therefore it would make sense to start to go out and call for a moratorium, let us say. For one, you might worry that if you started to implement what was like advertised as a temporary moratorium, let's say like just all, suppose you could just like pause for 1 year. Everybody around the world working in AI labs take a year holiday, right? And then they come back. So we'll have 1 more year. Okay. Maybe you think that would be good. But then you might worry about how likely is it that we will then restart after 1 year? Like, so you have to think, how would you possibly get such a pause? Well, it seems either you would have to have like some massive sentiment pushing for this, like some, and then why would that sentiment not still be there after a year, right? Like it might just harden, or some huge, maybe, or in combination with some huge regulatory apparatus, maybe like some international treaty or regulatory agency to actually implement this, right? Like, which would have to be pretty strict because, you know, AI development can be done in many ways. And even if you limit the compute power, people can still work on better algorithms, you know, on their own, you know, whiteboards or like so. So once you put all that in place, like these things have a tendency to kind of entrench themselves, and to like it's easy. Like sometimes it's easier to sort of create regulations than to remove them. So even if one did think that it would be better if we like had a little bit more time, it doesn't follow that therefore it would be sensible to agitate for like pausing AI for that duration of time.
So not even like for pausing in order to focus more on the alignment problem for some time and make sure that we solve it before we reach superintelligence?
I wouldn't advocate for that today. Now, I think what is plausible that at some point it would be valuable for whoever is developing I mean, whether it's like some company or some country, like there's going to be some project, right, at some point that is like blasting into this realm of true superintelligence. I think probably it would be nice if whoever does that had the opportunity to pause or go slow for a brief period of time. If they could spend a few extra months or maybe a year or two to really double check all their safeguards, right? And then like maybe increment the capability slowly rather than immediately like cranking everything up to 11 and just seeing what happens, right? That does seem very valuable from a safety point of view. And there's probably also a bunch of safety stuff that you can really only do once you have the system that you're trying to make safe. Like right now we have limited AIs and we can work on the safety for them, but how do we know that the techniques that work today will be relevant or applied to this future system that is super intelligent? Once you actually have the system in some sort of constrained form, you probably can make more rapid progress on AI safety for some period of time. So it would be valuable, I think, if they had the little bit of breathing room in that scenario. And so at that point, some kind of short pause becomes more desirable. Now, the ideal scenario for that might be if they actually just simply had a lead over their competitors. If they were like half a year ahead of the nearest other lab, then they would have the opportunity to slow down for half a year, right? And that kind of pause seems to have less risk of becoming permanent because it's self-limiting. Like after half a year, another AI lab catches up. Now, if it still seems sufficiently risky, then maybe that lab also decides to pause development or delay deployment, right? But then eventually another. So eventually that kind of pause expires. And it seems to have less propensity to sort of just accidentally become permanent. But these things are very complex, and it's not as if I have like a definitively fixed opinion on these. Like these requires kind of continuously evaluating things as we get more information about safety, about political realities, like the strategic landscape, what other risks are there. Like all of these factors have to ultimately come into all things considered judgment about these things.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you're saying that in some sense we might have to really have superintelligence to be able to know how to control it, like to study it enough to solve superalignment.
Well, I certainly don't think we should just wait until then to start working on it. Like it's just that it's easier to make. There's a lot of safety work that is possible to do now that you couldn't have done 10, 15 years ago. So back then you could do various theoretical work, conceptual work, But now we actually have these large language models, and you can see how they behave. You can do these various experiments. You can work on mechanistic interpretability to try to get better techniques for understanding how they represent the world and like their goals and how it's shaped by different. So there's a lot more handles on the problem now. And I presume like when you have the actual system in front of you, you finally nail down the architecture. And now it's just a question of, I don't know, scaling up the thinking time, or maybe like adding more compute. Like at that point, you get an increasingly like clear view of what it is that you're trying to make safe. And even when you have the final system, like it'd just be nice to have, maybe you have already prepared some automated tests that you want to do, like some test suite. Like we're starting to have today. Like, so even if you just had one extra day, right, maybe that would already give you like some significant little bit of added safety, because you would at least have a chance to run the test suite that you had prepared in advance. So like there might be a very high premium on at least having a little bit of time at end stage, and like an extra week then might be a lot more valuable than an extra week now.
But how would you know that you are at this end state? Because I mean, isn't there a possibility that already now, if we scale up things, that we could reach superintelligence with the current architectures?
Yeah, so that's like maybe makes current AI safety work more relevant than if we thought ultimately it would be some completely different architecture. But presumably you will be testing these systems quite regularly as you develop them, because like it costs a lot, so you don't want to just start some big process on a data center that cost you billions of dollars and then look back a month later and see that it fizzled out. Like you want to keep close tabs on how they perform on various internal benchmarks and test kits that you have, right, as you're training these. And as you get closer to actually transformative AI, it becomes also more important from a safety point of view, like to see. So maybe you could see that, wow, this new architecture scales very differently, so that now every day that we train it, it like improves by X amount on that's like looks super impressive. It's not plateauing. Maybe we can then predict that probably if we keep this going for another few weeks, it will sort of, reach IQ 130, then 150, and like now it's still going strong. Okay. And it's no signs of slowing down, then maybe you would know, okay, looks like this actually could be it. And maybe that's when you would, if you had this time to burn, maybe decide to use some of that to do whatever final sprint you could on the safety front.
Yeah, I think many people here are probably interested in your thoughts about, first of all timelines. Like, how quickly do you think we will actually reach superintelligence? Now we're talking about different future scenarios here, but like, what is your prognosis?
Well, I take short timelines seriously, including very short timelines. And I think we are now and have been for a couple of years in a situation where we can't exclude even very short timelines. Like it probably will take a bit longer, but we can't know that it couldn't happen in like 2 or 3 years. In fact, we can't really be that sure that it's not already. I mean, right now, for all we know, right, in some lab, maybe this like guy, working the night shift has like figured out this big unhobbling thing that just, wow, this was the thing we were missing. Now the same giant data centers that previously strained to reach like Claude 4.5 level or ChatGPT Pro 5, like whatever, right? That like now with this new tweak, they just learn they get the same sample efficiency as humans have. So that with their massive amount of data and our sample efficiency, they get like, it could happen. It's not very likely, but if it were happening right now, we would not necessarily know of it. Now, I think so we need to start to like take into account the possibility that there could be some surprise, or it could happen within just a small number of years. I think probably it will take longer, as I said, but we can't be confident in that.
Right, and by longer, are we talking decades or like?
Well, that's starting to get surprising. I mean, it's so impressive the rate at which things have been improving. If things were to take decades, like I guess one then thinks, what could possibly be the reason for that? So one is obviously some kind of external factor, like some geopolitical disaster or this like stop AI movement gaining steam and sort of shutting down. That's one type of way in which it could happen. And another is that it could turn out that a lot of the gains we've had to date, the rapid progress we've seen, has been completely dependent on the rapid increase in computing power that we've had. So, and if you look at it, you see like a large of it appears that maybe roughly speaking, like half the progress has been due to algorithmic advances and half to increased hardware. But it might be that the algorithmic advances themselves are kind of an indirect consequence of hardware. You can run more experiments if you have better computers. There's more incentive to actually work, like for smart people to work on the algorithms, like if it's an important thing. So, but suppose it turned out that the real driver here was just hardware scaling, and that you need to sort of scale it up by an order of magnitude to get like a constant number of IQ points, as it were, in capability, right? Then progress might soon slow down because we have now reached the levels of hardware investment where there is a limit to how much more they could grow. So if you're talking Stargate, the data center OpenAI is planning to build for $500 billion. Well, I mean, you could go a bit higher. I mean, maybe you could spend $5 trillion in theory, right? If you really thought that was the final push. But after that, it gets really hard, right? It starts to become a very large chunk of the world economy, like another order of magnitude of that. It's kind of half the world's GDP. So at some point, that has like to the extent that faster hardware available for AI research has been driven by increased capital investments, that will have to, it seems, start to slow down at least a little bit soon. And so at that point, if that was what was like driving this rapid progress, you could imagine if we haven't reached superintelligence already by that point, then maybe timeline starts to stretch out. Maybe what will then need to happen is that we have to wait for some theoretical breakthrough that makes it possible to do this way more efficiently. That could happen.
Okay, and do you think that this is likely, or is?
I mean, I think less likely than the alternative. I mean, it does look like we are sort of within striking distance, it seems to me, with the continued scale up and everything. But we've never done this before, so really we have to think in terms of probability distributions here.
So it sounds as if you think it would be more likely than not that we have it within a decade.
Certainly, I guess there are two ways of thinking about this. So there's like the inside view. If I just look at the algorithms, the progress, the specific things, then I would say yes. Then there's this second way of looking at things, which is like you stand back, you maybe have young children that go to school, you have like look at all the people who go around their ordinary business, and you think, do I really think that the world will, as we know it, will end completely within less than 10 years, and that pension funds are just wasting their time, and that nobody should build a railway line because it's never gonna need like that is that. So then there's like some, I guess, sanity penalty that comes from this kind of more common sense perspective. And so my actual views are some sort of superposition between those. But this, I don't know, this kind of common sense prior influence is not strong enough to, I think, overcome the inside perspective fully on these things.
All right. So is it like it's you think that it will happen soon, but you don't feel that it will happen soon, or it's you mean that you should really take into consideration this like sanity check perspective as well?
I don't think it should dominate your thinking. I think you shouldn't completely lose touch with it. So I think, like, from a practical point of view, I would like take this very seriously, spend most of my time maybe operating on the assumption that we are, exactly how many years is hard to say, but like we are kind of approaching this critical juncture in human history. But then if there are things that can sort of hedge your bet, like, would you not want your child to have a good education because you just assume that computers will anyway do everything? So probably not. Like, it seems like do some sensible thing just in case we turn out to have been a bit nuts and crazy about this thing, as so many other people have been throughout history about so many other things.
Yeah, right. So, given on this, the at least high possibility of quite short timelines, and also that we haven't really solved the alignment problem, even though you said that we've made some progress. Like, what is your p-doom? What is the probability that it all goes?
Yeah, I haven't really expressed a particular p-doom. Because I think it might also turn out to depend quite a lot on your definition of doom. So I think you can sort of imagine one class of scenarios where things just completely like all the value is lost kind of thing, clearly doom, and then like another utopia, right? So not doom. But then I think there's a broad class of scenarios which are such that even if we could now see exactly what will happen, we might still be unsure whether to count that as doom or not. Like it might be future is really weird and some of the things we now thought were really important and valuable have disappeared, but other things have appeared that might also have value, and we might not really have some easy way to tote all of that up. Like how much is it worth to get rid of factory farming, or to get rid of third world poverty, or to get rid of cancer, and then maybe you lose some of the various things that humans think are very important. Like, I don't know, the idea of being a breadwinner or having discrete minds in separate crania as opposed to one big blob, or I don't know exactly what it would be, but quite likely the future will be very weird in such a way that it might contain both elements that some people might regard as negative and other people might regard as positive. And so, I mean, in fact, I think that maybe that middle possibility might be perhaps more likely than either the clearly not doom or the clearly doom.
Okay, so but if we're speaking strictly about the extinction scenario that everyone dies, like, do you think that there's a high possibility of that?
No, I mean, so then there is another complication that comes in here, which is that even if we have a misaligned AI that doesn't care about us and that has the power, if it wanted to eradicate all humans, there might be other reasons, instrumental reasons for that AI not to do so. It might, for example, want to be cooperative with other AIs that might exist in the universe, that might either care about human-like creatures or care about general ethical principles or norms of cooperation. And because it would be very cheap for an AI to preserve humanity, maybe even give us the whole planet or the whole solar system, right? There's a lot of space out there. You could get like 99.99999 for a lot of nines of all the resources for its preferred use, and still manage to keep humans around in like some kind of paradise-like environment for us if it's so wished. So it wouldn't require much, it seems, either of intrinsically caring for us a little bit or placing some instrumental value in having us around. That might then result in, even in the case where you get a radically misaligned AI that ends up in a position of absolute power, where you still don't get human extinction from that.
Okay, yeah, it's very interesting because when I read Superintelligence, like it feels as if your views on this might have changed a little bit, because then you talk about it really as I mean that it would really want to, as quickly as possible, start to colonize the universe, because if it waits, like, it will automatically lose like many stars and galaxies just because it waited a little bit longer until it started sending out probes, like, because there are then parts of the universe that it can't reach anymore. Do you think that this will be outweighed by this theoretical like consideration?
No, I mean, it might want to reach quickly, but hopefully not killing us would not cause much of a delay in that regard. I mean, you could still have some massive place in the desert where like huge starships go up, or you do some fusion reactor, like whatever, right? That doesn't require wiping out all humans around the planet. Even if you sort of wanted to like invest massive resources in just getting something out there that could then start a sort of self-replicating process spreading through the galaxy and beyond. If you want it to be even more economical, you might even imagine uploading humans and kind of continuing us on a more efficient substrate, or like there are various possibilities. But it does complicate the question of assigning a probability to human extinction, because it might be quite a different probability than the probability of misaligned AI taking over. And then it then becomes like whether you then count that as doom or not, then might depend quite sensitively on your value function. Like if you mostly care about people, normal people with normal human values, having great human lives, living happily with their friends and family, and doing the human-like things with art and cinema and perfect medicine and like all of these things. If that's most of what you care about, then this in some of these scenarios, like things might be like 99% of as good as they could possibly be. If on the other hand, you're like a utilitarian of the sort that cares about the total amount of utility in the universe, and you would want to transform all these galaxies into hedonium or something like that, like matter optimized for feeling pleasure, then the scenario might be basically as bad as total loss, because like Earth is like an insignificant crumb in this vast sea of resources. So if all the rest of the stuff were used to, I don't know, make paper clips or whatever the AI happens to want, if that doesn't happen to coincide with what this kind of aggregative consequentialist value perspective would want, then it might count as basically rounds to zero. So you might get a radically different opinion on this scenario, whether it counts as doom or like an amazing success, depending on which value function you have, where different people might like choose these different value functions. Neither of these value function is so crazy that nobody would have it. Like, so that's an example of what I was alluding to earlier, that there might be this big category in the middle, where whether it counts as doom or not depends quite sensitively on how we evaluate it in ways that might not be very clear or obvious to us now, even if we could see exactly how like things would play out, which we can't.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I still find it interesting because it really feels quite different from reading your book, and I wonder if like this idea that it would want to care for humanity because of some future interaction with other super AIs and cooperation. I mean, why would it specifically care for us and not other animals, and then see us as sort of parasites on the earth? Or like, is this really something? Like, it seems like a very important question. If you really believe that this is likely to happen, that it will sort of leave the humanity in peace, or if it's more likely that it will do something that it just won't care about us. I mean, that seems to be very, very important to sort of sort out.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't express like a likelihood on this, but it like one reason is that there might be other civilizations out there that manage to align their AI, for example. I would hope that if we align our AI, it will at least care a little bit about other creatures out there on other planets, other like ape-like creatures or octopuses that became sentient and develop a tech civilization. And like if our super intelligence, like eventually, like in 500 million years, we come across some octopus civilization, I would like to think that we would then want to be nice to them. So if there are at least some AIs like that around, then they might use like engage in trades and stuff like that you know would promote these values. That doesn't seem that that unlikely. And what exactly will happen in that space, very hard to predict, but at least it seems like a live possibility that from our current sort of occluded perspective, we are in no position to dismiss. I would also say by part of explanation, so you noticed like some kind of, I don't know, tonal shift or shift of emphasis or something like that compared to superintelligence. And it is true. And part of that is the context. So when I was working on that book, the whole issue of AI safety was completely ignored by basically everyone. Certainly nobody in academia took it seriously. Aside from Eliezer and like a few other people on the internet, the whole world just dismissed it as science fiction, or like, and to the extent that people were interested in AI, the only focus was like, how can we actually get it? Like, so we have academic departments trying to make progress in this and that. So at that point, there seemed to like a clear deficit on the side of understanding what we were actually working towards and understanding there could be risks, which seemed really important, because if you could understand that, then we might also actually use the time available to prepare ourselves to avoid the pitfalls, right? If you have some conception of what could go wrong, you might take action to prevent things from going wrong. In the intervening years, there has been a big shift, and now there is much wider recognition of the idea of AI safety as being important. Like, it really has become part of the mainstream conversation, and including among sort of serious people. You hear world leaders talking about this, you hear the tech leaders of big companies. And as I said, the Frontier AI Labs now have like research groups working hard on this, and there are a bunch of other organizations as well. So the situation on the ground has changed a lot. So now I think there is like less need for me to keep harping on the same thing again when that point is already quite widely recognized. And so I'm not focusing more on like other insights that maybe haven't yet sort of percolated as widely, and trying to bring those to people's attention.
Right. So your focus is now on more on other things. But still, it would be interesting to just get like sort of a feeling for, because I mean you were obviously quite worried about this when you wrote the book, and some things have changed now. Given everything you know and the situation we're in, if you really had to put a number or at least a range on the probability of like complete human extinction, would it be like a 2-digit number, your pre-doom, or?
Well, yeah, maybe, but I don't know. It also might depend on, like, sorry to be this kind of depends on what you mean. Depends on what you mean by human, but it might depend on what you mean by human. Like, if there are like only uploads left and no biological humans, for example, does that count?
I think maybe it wouldn't count. I mean, or do you think that that I would be myself if I was uploaded?
Yeah, under certain conditions, that I would think so. And in fact, it's plausible to me that like the best paths involve uploading at some point. You know, I think I would favor a world probably where different people were free to choose their own trajectories. But ultimately, I don't see why we need to use meat to do the computation when like semiconductors might be ultimately much more efficient. But all of these things, it would be nice. I think like if we tried now just to make up our mind about a host of those kinds of questions, we would kind of be bound to get at least one of them wrong. And so what we would hope for, I think, is maybe to end up in a situation where we're able to like think a lot harder about these things and deliberate, maybe with AI advice, rather than having to sort of implement our current best conception of the future we would want, and then locking ourselves into that. I think that likely would sort of miss out on a lot of really exciting possibilities. So that's one. There are other factors as well. I don't know how much time we have. Like, I have one recent paper. It's not really a fully developed paper, but AI creation and the cosmic host, it's called, and which introduces, it's quite hand-wavy, but the idea being that if we give birth to superintelligence, it will enter a world in which there quite possibly are other super beings already in existence. So these could be other AIs built by some alien civilization in some remote galaxy. They could be like in the average interpretation of quantum mechanics, there are many branches, and so there might be other branches of Earth originating life that have produced or will produce different forms of superintelligence. If the simulation argument right is to be trusted, we maybe in a simulation the simulators then would be presumably super intelligent and be super beings, and of course traditional theological conceptions as well, right? God is a super being, usually super intelligent, and so in either of these cases, there would be this kind of cosmic host consisting of these other super beings. And one important desideratum for us going forward here, I think, is that if we create super intelligence, we would want to make it such that it can get along with this cosmic host and maybe adhere to whatever norms might have been developed within this cosmic host. And so that, I think, adds a dimension that has to some extent been missing in the classical discourse around AI safety, where the attitude really has very much been, how can we sort of maximally control the AI to implement the highest degree of our own expected utility maximization, just taking our own preferences into account. But there might be this much larger picture where we are very small and very weak and very new. And there is like this kind of incumbent set of super powerful beings, and how our superintelligence interacts with that might be like a very critical part of how well things go. And so I think the upshot of that is a bit unclear. We don't know precisely what that means, but I think it slightly increases the chance that we ought to develop superintelligence, and also I think that we should approach it more with a little bit of an attitude of humility, that that we don't know very much here. There's like more things in heaven and on earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy, and so I think it like there is some different mindset that maybe also comes from considering that type of perspective.
Okay, yes, yeah, obviously a lot of things to consider here. Well, I'll try not to stretch out our time too much, because I know you're sitting up late now. But can I just, because I feel that I still I don't have any clear idea of where you are on this extinction scale, really. And this is something that I think worries me and lots of people. Would you say that your view now, like you still acknowledge that there is a risk that everyone just dies, but you think that that risk is not like a major risk anymore, or?
No, it's like it's a pretty serious outcome if it happens, right? So it's like, sorry, I'm getting. So like, even if the risk was quite small, it would be worth taking seriously. But it is worth bearing in mind, if we are kind of concerned about our own personal deaths, that it is something that is likely to happen anyway. And then you might say, well, it kind of matters when it happens, right? It's not just whether you die, but like rather not be tomorrow. And so then you might think in terms of life expectancy. But then if you actually start doing the math on that, very plausibly our life expectancy goes up dramatically if we develop superintelligence, even if misalignment risk is quite high. Because if AI is developed and it's successful, if it's safe, then it could do a lot to advance medicine, invent rejuvenation therapies, anti-aging medicine, and so forth. And so our lifespan, then conditional and gone well, would be very long. So yeah, you can start to do that. Goes back to this paper that I'm working on, which I'm more to say on that, hopefully in the relatively near future. But the upshot is that even if one is concerned mostly in terms of personal survival, then even then it is not at all clear that should make us kind of anti-AI or wanting to slow it down by a huge amount.
All right, but I suppose that you can make that argument even if the risk was like 99% that everyone would die, and I mean most people would probably not like to take that bet.
Well, if it's that big, then the argument might not work. I mean, then it becomes more complicated. So you might think of esoteric ways in which we might achieve very long lifetimes, even if we don't develop AI. But also, you might not value future life expectancy linearly. You might have a kind of diminishing returns or time discounting. And so then, and especially if you thought that the risk was going down over time, if the risk now was 99%, but it was falling by like 5% a year or something, like you would prefer to wait. But at some point, once the risk is low enough, or once the rate of further decline is low enough, depending on various parameters, then you would want to favor taking the plunge. So, but there are other things, of course, like aside from our own personal survival, we might also care about other things like the survival of the human species or Earth-related things like the kind of human values in the broader sense and other things. So it's very hard to form like an all things considered view about these big picture questions. I call it kind of macro strategy, like trying to figure out how all of these different pieces fit together. And it's quite plausible that we have overlooked at least one crucial consideration, like some like fact or argument or idea, such that if only we discovered it or fully took it into account, it would kind of quite profoundly change our opinion, not just about the details about things, but like about the overall direction that we should be trying to go in. Like, should we want more global coordination or less? Faster AI progress or slower? Like, do we want more synthetic biology or less? More surveillance or less? Like these big macro strategic parameters, it can be very hard to form any kind of confident opinion about what the answer to those kinds of questions is.
Yeah, right. Thank you for all of these like very interesting thoughts. I realized that there are many things to think about here. Would you have time for like one question from the audience, or do you?
Well, let's do one, and then I think I'll have to.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Okay, if we have one, someone who's eager to ask anything. Yeah, we have one there. You can say it and I can repeat it because he's hearing this mic. Yeah, do you think that we'll take advantage of our own superintelligence that we create to fend off threats from other superintelligences that could reach us? So if we use Neuralink to sort of merge with superintelligence, if we can then use that, so this will be like an evolutionary change. Yeah, is there a possibility that it will merge with AI somehow?
Yeah, my guess is that would happen after we have radical superintelligence that then perfects these technologies that would allow really perfect brain-computer interfaces or uploading or other things of that sort. My guess is that AI is moving quite fast, and there are all kinds of complications with like actually implanting things in the brain that sort of sometimes gets elided in media headlines. Like you get like risk of infection, you get like it moves around a little bit, and you have to like. So I think it's like great for people with disabilities who can like now walk or see or something thanks to this implant, but it's quite difficult to do something that is better than like a normal human. So we can interact with computers already through our eyeballs, like 100 million bits per second, directly into our visual cortex, large part of the brain customized specifically for processing this information. Output is a little bit more limited, but still, I'm more limited about my ability to think than my ability to sort of speak and type usually, right? It's not as if I could like be 100 times more productive if I could type 100 times faster. So that would be my main guess. Now, it is possible that if you have high bandwidth interfaces, the brain could learn to somehow leverage external computational substrates in ways that would unlock some kind of synergy, like some large pool of external working memory that the brain somehow could learn to access if it were like in high bandwidth communication with it over a long period of time. We can't completely exclude that. Or like if you had many humans that kind of could telepathically communicate, maybe initially it would just be telepathic communication, which would not really be that different from speaking or something. But maybe if they were like connected like that over a long period of time, maybe they could then eventually learn to have thoughts that sort of like a single thought, complex thought that sort of expanded over multiple brains without the whole thought being located in one of them. So it's like possible that these more interesting things, but it just seems like if your timelines on AI is short, like some single-digit number of years, it's just hard to see how these things would kind of happen in a way that would be really meaningfully change the needle within that timescale. Would be my guess.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Let's hope then that the superintelligence will be kind to us. And it's been so great to talk to you. I'm really sorry for sort of pushing a little bit on the time. It's just so extremely interesting to hear your thoughts on this. And I think we should give a big round of applause for Nick Bostrom.
Well, thank you, everybody. And it was fun. Thank you, Jonas.
Thank you, and yeah, have a good night now, and yeah, good luck with all the research. I look forward to reading your papers also in the future.